everybody. Welcome back. It's great to have you here. What I want to do today is have a little bit of a discussion about the background of myself and the cars that I've owned leading up to this project. And we've got to come up with a project name for this thing. So I'm going to leave that up to you guys. I've got a few of my own ideas. Hopefully you guys can give me some input as well, and we can come up with a really good project name for this R32. Starting out, when I was 15 years old, bought my first vehicle. It was a 1979 Mustang GT 350. First year of the Fox body chassis, only year they put a 351 in it. I pulled it out of the junkyard, paid $500 for it. My father and I went through the thing and built it from the ground up. We went through the engine, we went through the transmission, we went through the rear end. We rebuilt the suspension, we rebuilt the brakes, we redid the interior. When it was finished, my father said, "Now, because you did it, you know how to work on it." And that was the biggest influence in my life to get me started on loving cars in the automotive scene. Didn't last very long. A 15 to 16-year-old kid just fresh out of getting his driver's license with a 351 5-speed Mustang, wrecked it and totaled it. After that, my parents decided, you're on your own. So after bumming rides with a bunch of friends of mine in high school, I noticed there were about 5 guys that were rolling in every morning together, and they were all rolling in MK2 GTIs. And there was just something about that car that caught my attention. All of them had lowered suspension, they all had the tinted windows, and a few minor upgrades on the outside of these cars. Some of them were 8 valves, some of them were 16 valve, and actually 2 other guys eventually came with Rabbit GTIs. And I thought that those were just the coolest looking cars, so I ended up going over, talking to them. They had a little bit of a car club that they had, everybody had gotten the same car. They all shared the same interest in the same platforms. And so they had their own little car club. I jumped in the passenger seat with one of these guys, and it was an MK2 16 valve GTI. And after that, I was hooked. I couldn't believe how quick a 16 valve GTI 2-door little compact hatch was. This thing would smoke Mustangs of its day, would smoke Camaros of its day, and even give Corvettes of the day an easy beat down. So I thought to myself, perfect platform for me to work on. Fairly inexpensive, fairly decent aftermarket support, and I had a group of guys that had a wealth of knowledge around me that could help me learn how to work on this platform. So I bought one. Couldn't afford to get the 16 valve model at the time. Again, 16-year-old, going to high school, working after the hours, working on the weekends, scraping everything together that I could to buy a vehicle. So my 8 valve that I bought was pretty beat down to begin with. But through the help of these guys, I went ahead and turned it into something that I thought was great for me. I ended up doing suspension, brakes, wheels and tires, exhaust system. I even pulled the head off and sent the head out and had a Schrick cam installed. And back then a Schrick cam was the top of the line camshaft for those vehicles. Put it all back together, did all the modifications, and if any of you guys have MK2s or even MK1s, the very first mod I did to it was Swiss cheese in the airbox. That's the thing that everybody did back then. It made the car sound so much more aggressive, it brought more airflow into the airbox, and it gave some performance. It was a cheap, free upgrade. So, once I got it done, I started going to car shows. We all started going to car shows together. And we had this little Volkswagen scene up in Columbus, Ohio, where I grew up at. Met a couple other people along the way, just driving down the road, and you would see another Volkswagen come the other way that was done up pretty nice. And you guys would wave and point and pull over and meet, and we ended up growing our car club into a fairly decent amount of folks. Long story short, we found out that in Ohio there was this national Volkswagen car show and drag race called Larry's Off-Road Nationals. Very first time I went there, didn't even know it existed, and it still goes on today from what I understand. What the heck? I sent my drove up there with my buddies, entered my little 8-valve 1986 GTI that at the time I had done brakes, exhaust, suspension, big bumper upgrade, which if you look at the 86 Mark IIs, it had a little thin bumper going across it. The 90, 91, 92s had a big bumper on there, and that was a big thing to do back then. So I did big bumper upgrade. I did the 4-round headlights that you see in the 16 valves. Mine was an 8-valve that came with the square headlights. So I've done quite a bit to this car at this point in time. And it actually landed me second place at the Larry's Off-Road Nationals. So I was hooked at that point in time. Long story short, driving down the road one day, see a blue Audi in the pass. I was in the fast lane, he was in the slow lane. He comes up next to me, we're playing on the interstate. No matter what I did, he just blew my doors off. Come to find out, that thing was an Audi RS4. And if any of you guys know what an Audi RS4 is, that's all-wheel drive, 6-cylinder, twin turbo. And this was about 2000. Didn't even know what it was. I was like, oh my gosh, I put all this time and energy and money into this car, and I'm getting my doors blown off. Ended up selling that car and getting an 87 16-valve, and had a bunch of money saved up, as well as a fair decent amount of money that I'd gotten from my car with all the effort that I'd put into it to build the 16-valve. Had it parked out at the development that I lived in. It was a condominium complex, and we had this large area for parking. One of the neighbors backed his Nissan Frontier truck into the front end of it and totaled the car out. I didn't know what the heck to think. These cars at that point in time had become almost impossible to find. And when you did, they were going for $7,000 to $8,000. So, ended up with a Volkswagen Rabbit, 1984. Drove that thing around, fixed it up a little bit. Kind of lost my interest in them at that point in time because Hondas were coming out. They were a lot faster out of the box and they had more aftermarket support. So I ended up jumping ship and going to Hondas. From Hondas, I jumped ship, went to Nissans. From Nissans, I jumped ship, went to Subarus. From Subarus, I had a Mazda RX-8. I had a few other vehicles as well that we won't get into. But I always knew in the back of my mind, one day I want to go back to Volkswagens. And that's when I found out that the R32 was coming out. Ended up wanting an R32 real bad, never could afford one. But kept that in the back of my mind. Fast forward to now, had the opportunity, so I jumped on it. And here's where we are today. And I'm going to turn this thing into something that I always wanted to have in a Volkswagen, and I'm excited that you guys get to come along for the journey. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we get started into this project. Now, I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank you for subscribing. Please comment below. We need to come up with some kind of name for this project. Not really sure what I want to call it yet. I mean, it's 2019, it's a new year. We need to come up with a new exciting project name because really, believe it or not, my horsepower goals for this thing are going to be around 600 horsepower, all-wheel drive. So, it's going to be a beast. So, think about that, put that down in your comments, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching Grit and Gears.